We're here with Franklin Castañeda of the Committee in Solidarity with Political Prisoners.
The Committee in Solidarity with Political Prisoners is an organization of human rights defenders. It was founded in 1973 and is the oldest non-governmental human rights organization in Colombia. Our foundation today dedicates the majority of our efforts to attending to victims and to persons detained for political motives in this country through legal counsel and humanitarian assistance.
¿Cómo ven ustedes como organización la situación?
How do you as an organization view the situation of political prisoners in Colombia and the prison situation in the country in general?
Bueno, empiezo por la última parte, la situación carcelaria en Colombia. Lo primero que debemos decir es que Colombia vive actualmente un...
Well, I'll start with the last thing you mentioned, the prison situation in Colombia. The first thing we should say is that Colombia is currently living through a period of hyper-incarceration, which means that they are creating new crimes, making sentencing more severe, and drawing out the time it takes to prosecute people. This has, as a consequence, led to longer periods of imprisonment for many, but we also have a lot of people in jail in Colombia. Just to give you some figures, 5 years ago there were 60,000 people imprisoned in Colombia. Today there are 115,000 people imprisoned, and the government just last week signed a new law that will lead to the imprisonment of many more people. But moreover, those who are already imprisoned will spend even more time in jail. As a consequence, there is a very serious problem of overcrowding that the government has tried to hide by showing some prisons where this overcrowding does not exist. However, this hides the situation of several prisons in the country where overcrowding tops 200%, like for example the Modelo prison and the La Picota prison in Bogotá, just to mention only two of them.
Por ejemplo, la cárcel Modelo, la cárcel Picota de Bogotá, por mencionarte solamente dos de ellas. Ahora bien,
now, in addition to overcrowding, there are also health problems. Those detained in the prisons are subjected to a health system that is provided by an entity contracted by the state. A company that was contracted to attend to 60,000 detained persons now has to attend to 115,000, which simply says that the healthcare business is not satisfactory in economic terms, and as a consequence is not providing adequate healthcare services. Finally, those persons detained for political reasons are considered enemies of the state, and so the state simply places them in the worst conditions within the prisons. As such, political detainees are equally affected by health problems, equally affected by the lack of public services, equally affected by overcrowding, but are also persecuted by those who should be watching over them. The idea persists that INPEC exists as a civil entity, but the reality is that it is formed as a military institution, and as a consequence ends up treating political detainees, or those who are accused of being insurgents, as the enemy, and so treats them as such in the prisons.
Militar, y que en consecuencia termina considerando a quienes son detenidos políticos, a quienes están acusados de ser insurgentes, enemigos, y les da ese tratamiento en las cárceles.
Pronto podrías hablar un poco más sobre la cárcel de Valledupar.
Could you talk a little more about the prison in Valledupar, which I understand has been in the news recently? Are there discussions about temporarily or permanently closing this prison?
En estos momentos nos encontramos a la espera de una determinación judicial.
At this moment, we are awaiting a judgment on a lawsuit that was filed on behalf of more than 560 detainees with the support of human rights defenders organizations such as the Committee in Solidarity with Political Prisoners, in which we demanded that the Colombian state close the Valledupar prison. There are many reasons for this. The first is that the prison does not have water services. What do we have? We have a prison that gives detainees 5 minutes of water a day, where 1,340 detainees have been reduced to 1,100 because of a large number of transfers that happened in the preceding days. These 1,100 detainees have to fight amongst themselves to fill water tanks and to have access to this water throughout the day. It is a prison located in a rural area with a temperature that varies between 35 and 40 degrees centigrade, with humidity above 80%. It is located in an area where one needs to consume a lot of liquid, but moreover you need other things to be able to withstand the suffocating heat that exists. Fans, air conditioning, etc. And you are not allowed to bring these items into the prison. As a consequence, we have human excrement, but without providing water services, logically, where there is no water, there is no waste disposal. Therefore, the detainees have no way to take care of their human necessities and dispose all of this in a clean manner. As a result, they have to do their necessities onto paper, in bags, and then throw them out into other prison yards. And obviously, from those other yards, people will complain. We have an environment that is totally unhealthy in the prison, despite the fact that in 10 years, an enormous amount of resources have been invested without being able to find some kind of solution. When we have a situation that is so unsanitary, the first thing that happens is disease will spread. At the beginning of the interview, we talked about how the inmate population in Colombia is a sick population. Now we imagine a prison where, in addition to the psychological problems associated with incarceration, you also have stomach illnesses, intestinal diseases, and diarrheic illnesses.
Ahora imaginemos una cárcel que además de las enfermedades psicológicas propias de estar encerrado, está produciendo enfermedades estomacales, enfermedades intestinales, enfermedades diarreicas.
Almost all the visits from the Health Secretary of Cesar Department to the Valledupar prison have shown that the detainees' food is contaminated with fecal matter. Of course, we have gastrointestinal epidemics in Colombia, and in Colombia there is no health system. While it does not exist in other prisons, in the case of Valledupar you have a prison that is actually making its detainees sicker. And of course the situation is much worse in a prison where there is no water. But we also have the issue of the penitentiary guard in Valledupar prison. It is one of the most violent. We have documented, just in the last 2 years, 80 cases of torture, cruel, inhumane and degrading treatments. Just during the protest that has been going on for the past month and a half or so, there are more than 30 cases of detainees who have been beaten by the INPEC penitentiary guard. The penitentiary guard has injured people, and these are the cases where the Colombian justice system does nothing. And there is another problem. Strangely enough, it would appear that the penitentiary guard of Valledupar prison is being protected by the Colombian justice system. There are currently 56 criminal complaints, 56 investigations opened by the National Public Prosecutor, many of which have been opened for the past 5 years without any significant positive resolution. None of the investigations into allegations of torture have resulted in identifying or ordering the suspension of even one of the guards. 99% of the complaints that have been registered by the inmates, the Human Rights Ombudsman, the Inspector General and Human Rights Defenders organizations against the guard in the prison remain in impunity. There are more than 750 complaints against the guard that are completely in impunity. Why is this the case? Because the Federal Bureau of Prisons in Colombia taught a series of methods that have degenerated or generated cruel, inhumane and degrading treatment, and have generated or degenerated into systematic practices of torture. We have evidence that the INPEC training manuals are producing torture in Colombia's prisons, and that in the prisons of Colombia people end up as victims of serious human rights violations. And it is totally systematic. When we see that in those same training manuals and the way of treating detainees, we find a series of methods and mechanisms that would be totally illegal in any other democratic state in the world.
Haya tortura, que en las cárceles de Colombia la gente termine padeciendo de graves violaciones a los derechos humanos. Y es totalmente sistemático el tema cuando vemos que desde los mismos manuales de formación, que desde la misma instrucción que se les brinda a los detenidos, encontramos una serie de métodos y de mecanismos que serían totalmente ilegales en cualquier otro estado democrático del mundo.
¿Ustedes conocen cuántas personas?
Do you know how many political prisoners there are in Colombia?
El Comité de Solidaridad con los Presos Políticos brinda atención tanto en lo humanitario como en lo jurídico.
The Committee in Solidarity with Political Prisoners provides humanitarian and legal support to more than 2,000 persons detained for political reasons in the country. We work in 44 of the approximately 164 prisons. However, I cannot tell you how many thousands of political prisoners there are in Colombia for various circumstances, the first of which is the presumption of innocence. In Colombia there is judicial persecution, whereby one tries to portray many social leaders principally as part of the violent insurgency, like a combatant population. So by counting them among the statistics of detained combatants, I would be committing a serious error. We could count them as politically persecuted people, however we have serious limitations with regards to being able to access the prisons. With things like this, we can trust a little in what we see firsthand, however it is totally underrepresented. We don't even attend to half of the incarcerated population in Colombia.
Podemos dar fe un poco de lo que nosotros atendemos, sin embargo es un subregistro totalmente, no atendemos siquiera la mitad de la población carcelaria en Colombia.